How we doing, class? Welcome to the Sunday night Morristown Soccer Coach edition of class. Because we are going to have a speaker in tomorrow's class, I wanted to do chapter 14 via video, and this way... Sorry about that. This way, on Wednesday's class, it can just be a review class. We can finish up chapter 13, and we can answer any other kinds of questions. Our last chapter is an interesting one, and it's probably a good way to wrap up the entire text. And basically trying to, pardon the pun, translate what we've been talking about all semester into a global setting. I mean, pretty much everything that we've talked about this semester has been for a North American, U.S., individualistic culture. All the verbal, the nonverbal, every one of the chapters. And this chapter is going to try to unwind that a little bit. Now, do we have selling around the world? Yes. Is it the same as it is in the U.S.? No. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, for something as simple as the U.S. pays commission, I mean, in many parts of the world, to have 100% commission salary is probably non-existent. It's probably needle in a haystack. Where in sales jobs in the U.S., I bet you it's still 10, 15, 20, a third of all sales jobs that are out there. Unless you sell, you don't get paid. You know. What I can say is that old school selling, Alpha Dog, Lone Wolf, Willy Loman, that was never in existence anywhere around the world. The rest of the world is more collectivist, more relationship, more new school before we were new school. You know, so the more your firm is new school, CRM, the easier it will be for your firm to adjust to most other sales conditions around the world. The front half of the chapter is your basic IB stuff that you guys all had here at Stillman. Not a big deal. So globalization, yes. It's easier for us to sell products and services around the world, and to the point where, guess what? Many companies get the majority of their revenue around the world. China is probably, if not this year, within next year, be the single largest revenue source for Apple. You know, it's not surprising. You know. But we have to think about how even our new school and our individualistic culture is different than it is around the other parts of the world. So, we can't talk about global anything without talking about culture. Culture is a system of shared beliefs and morals by various people in a particular region or nation around the world. There is no one-size-fits-all anywhere. And then the values are what people hold as important to them. So if we're thinking about, we're going to get to this individualistic versus collectivist stuff very soon. But for salespeople, we're primarily thinking about language, time, the relationship, ethics, and nonverbal. Well, language, if you know the language, the lingo, the behaviors, it will be a lot easier for you as a salesperson to assimilate into a culture and tell people what's in it for them. So that you don't have the mindset of your headquarters and your home nation. That you basically need to be able to sell in the local culture. And language is a part of it. Even beyond language, the concept of time. Here in the U.S., we have a very strict you know, concept of time, I guess you could say that, where 9 o'clock is 9 o'clock. If we look at Northern Europe, the Denmarks, the Germanys, the Swedens, they are also very much in time the way we view time. But if we look at Latin cultures, if we look at Asian cultures, time is much more flexible. It's less precise. Latin time, I mean, if you're invited to a party in a Latin American nation and you're invited at 9 and you show up at 9, it actually would be very embarrassing, not only for you, but for the host. 9 means don't show up before 10. Literally. 9:30 is too early. 9:45, you're probably early. You're bleeding edge. 10 o'clock, yeah, you're good. I bet you a ton of people show up between 10 and 10:30. Seriously. Now, I said this earlier, our movement towards New School and our movement towards CRM is a substantially better fit for Asian and Latin American cultures. They, particularly in Asia, they will not do business with anyone that they do not have a strong personal relationship with, period. In Japan, in South Korea, I mean, it might take 6, 9, 12, 18 months of just hanging out, going to lunch, visiting factories, and meeting each other before you can even negotiate a thing. And if you come from a company and you guys are only thinking about monthly reports, it's going to be very sensitive. It's going to be very hard for you guys to adjust. Ethics. Now, what we have as legal and illegal and what we think is ethical and unethical, there's different cultural norms around the world. When Walmart went to China, they had a very, very difficult time to the point where they started wearing their name tags, and underneath of it said, "We cannot accept gifts of any type." Because in China, it's a gifting culture. Everything they do with gifts. And for someone in China to come talk to someone from Walmart in Walmart's China headquarters, they would bring a gift. Walmart US, there's no gifts ever accepted under any circumstances. So this was something that Walmart tried to not adapt to the local culture, and they still struggled with that. Now, here in the US, we have very strict rules and regulation about bribes. But a lot of other countries around the world, even in France and Germany, bribes are tax deductible as business expenses. Because we call it a bribe and they call it something else. And it's a little bit of money to grease the wheels. And maybe here in the US, it's not flat out cash, but if you give someone Super Bowl tickets, and those Super Bowl tickets are, guess what? Box seats, $2,500 a seat. That's not a cash bribe, but I mean, it sure is a very, very big gift. Nonverbal. The nonverbal, I can say that eye contact is still good. And that tone is still very, very important. Some of our Asian and collectivist cultures, the intense eye gazing is probably, it's too strong. It's too much. They will look away. And also in different cultures, things have different means. We can do the victory sign here, and this is like no big deal. You do this in Australia, it's like giving someone the middle finger. So here's a little bit on our individualistic versus collectivist. Let me go to full. Where are we at? Here we go. So you can see a bigger version of this. So the Chinese culture is very collectivist. The American culture is very individualistic. This is I, this is we. Right? Earn your way, whatever you do, you earn. Very egalitarian. Very hierarchical. You must go through very rigid hierarchical ladder, Information oriented over here, more transactional, much complete relational. Americans try to reduce down to a single something. First, let's solve this, then move on. And the Chinese and a collectivist society will look at things more holistically, a bigger picture. Like I just said, sequential. This is circular. Keep coming back to the same thing. Tries to find an objective, singular truth. Collectivist societies seek a way or a process to do something. We like to argue. God, where's my cursor? There it is. We like to argue. We like to make our case and debate. They haggle. We love quick meetings. We are informal. We'll make cold calls. We are one of the few nations in the world that will really do cold calls. Collectivist societies have a long courting process. They are very formal, and they have lots of intermediaries. Remember, they're hierarchical in nature. Whoever is doing the selling has full authority. They're very direct. They do proposals first. Whoever you're talking to in collectivist societies, because multiple people have to say yes, not an individual. Everybody has very limited. And then we have a much more indirect conversations, and we explain things first. Individualists we're much more aggressive. We're much more impatient in terms of we're looking for a good deal. Collectivist societies like to question, they endure, and they want long term. Okay? This is a big deal when we talk about going international because, look at Apple. Apple needed to create software to have third-party keyboards with Chinese characters, but it's still the same phone because that's a software fix. But if we talk about Europe and ISO 9000, in order to sell products within the European Union, it has to be standardized to their particular requirements. They have certain quality standards. They have packaging standards. And you can't just take your product off the shelf in New York City, ship it over there via FedEx, and expect to sell it. Also, when we talk about goods and services around the world, we have to talk about supply chain and we have to talk about logistics. Because not only do you have salespeople on the ground, but you need to be able to get product to those particular markets. Well, where is it made? How much are the import tariffs? How do we move it around the European Union? I mean, for us, it's no big deal to take, a car built in Tennessee and ship it to New York City. That same distance, if you went from France to, the same distance, you could go through 6 countries. Every one, you have to stop at the border, you have to get papers checked, and it's much different. Pricing. Not only do you have higher prices depending on foreign markets, but, you take a product that here might be not low end, but certainly not high end, and you ship that abroad and it becomes more high end because it's more exclusive. I mean, a great example of this is Foster's. It's an Australian beer, but for all intents and purposes, Foster's is like Old Milwaukee in Australia. No one drinks it except for young kids. Here, Foster's has like a little bit of a premium connotation. Granted, it's not super high end. It's not Belgian, but it's certainly not Old Milwaukee. In Australia, it's Old Milwaukee. I think we just talked to some of that right here. Technology. That's fine. If we talk about sales structures, the global account manager. This is interesting. How does a global account manager, do you set up your sales force by country? Do you have a sales team in Europe that goes across Europe? How is it set up by matrix, by product? And who does the global sales executive report to? Directly to home country headquarters or through some other intermediary who then reports to the senior VP of selling? You need to make sure that the global account managers, yes, can deal with all the local cultures that they have to deal with, but really, how are they integrated in a reporting structure back to headquarters? This is a big challenge. Additional factors, qualifications, but sales training, I have a friend of mine, we've talked about it in class, how they sell in London. Not only do they not cold call, but they don't also, and London's kind of individualistic. It's only, if we look at the individualistic collectivist scale, London, Canada, and Australia are the 3 countries most close to the United States. Yet even in London, they don't ask for business. They don't close the way we close. No. It's probably best, unless the expatriates are trained really, really well. You got to go with local nationals, or at least nationals from the region that are familiar enough with European culture or some of the countries that they're going to. Expatriates is tough. Really, really tough. Alright, this is self-explanatory. Now, we talked about motivation. We did an entire chapter on motivation. Everything that we talked about was in terms of individualistic culture. Motivation around the world is a whole nother ballgame. We tend to motivate with money. Around the world, that's probably not the best way. The more you go towards a collectivist scale, money is the last thing, or significantly less important. Recognition and recognition alone might be it. A couple more slides. I said earlier we talked about 100%, commission-based jobs. In Europe, that's pretty hard to pull off given the laws that they have. I mean, off the bat, they get 4 weeks vacation. They have substantial, stronger workers' rights rules in the EU. It's pretty tough. Actually, I'll tell you another story real quick. It's pretty tough to have a job in Europe that would be all commission oriented. The other thing that's really tough in Europe, it's really difficult to fire someone. We can fire someone here with cause. In the EU, in most of Europe, it is very difficult to fire someone with cause. And even if you do, it's almost like a year's pay that they get, and it's very, very challenging. Hiring and making sure you have the right people, it's one of the reasons why European companies move a little bit slower, because the hiring and the firing, that cycle, there is lots of legal reasons that slows the process down. They don't want to bring in 15 new recruits for a 9-month training program knowing that they're going to lose 7 of them. Losing 7 of them and having to pay those 7 just because of workers' rights in those particular nations, it's more expensive to fire the 7 than to keep them. And then when it comes down to evaluation, we have the same scenario that we can't just evaluate people on what they sell and how much we pay them. We treat the sales force differently in the U.S., almost like they're their own separate entity. Around the world, the sales force is just another department within the company. I will answer questions for Chapter 14 on Wednesday. We'll finish 13 and we'll have an exam. I'm out.